Yes, that is correct. I'll go more in depth. I think we're about ready to begin. I'm gonna need the minutes to go more in depth. So let's get started. Why don't we? Okay. So as Juanca said, the today's master class or the Graviton Training Session is going to be on the psychology of human leadership, and basically what it is I'm providing an ontology of leadership, a framework for everyone to understand how leadership works, because really leadership it's an inevitable part of our lives, right? We're always being led. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm gonna ask everyone to please silence their microphone. I'm gonna have in the end. There's gonna be like 30 minutes to get some questions in. So I'm just gonna talk for a lot of time, and then we can discuss it together on the last 30 minutes. So it's gonna be like 1 hour of me talking, and then hopefully a lot of you people can stay for 30 minutes where we can have a discussion. And yeah, that's the dynamic. So as I was saying, we cannot escape being led, really. And at the very minimum, we're being led by our culture and our internalized values. And really, people who are interested in leadership wish to transform themselves from directed to directing persons. And well, that's why it's relevant for everyone, whether you're a manager or just a contributor. What I'm going to be talking about hopefully will give you a better understanding of how these power dynamics work in terms of leadership. So we experience leadership really in the most explicit and considered state in the working environment, right? And leadership really contains questions of how we cope with life. Intuitively, we think of leadership as something that is defined normatively, right? That it has some type of ethical expectation that is placed on leaders. But really, the phenomenon of leadership really extends beyond ethical expectations. It is irrespective or indifferent of ethical expectations. There are going to be, as we're going to see, there are going to be power dilemmas that get brought up in when someone is in a leadership position, and where you're trying to mediate between a person individually and the team as a collective. So, as I'm saying, it's not only an inevitable part of our lives, but it is critical. So I wanted to take this chance to analyze leadership from a psychological lens. And so let's start with defining leadership, right? Let's the working definition that I'm going to be using for leadership is the determination of movement, right? Leadership as determination of movement. And as I said, it is the most relevant in the professional sphere, in the working environment. And so there are antitheses of leadership. There are states that make leadership not possible. And interestingly, freedom is one of the antitheses of leadership. Another one is conflict, which is very relevant to being a graviton. And another one is a fully determined system, which is basically when someone or something is not leading another, but they are driven by invisible forces. For example, we cannot say that the sun is leading the earth, right? With their gravitational pull. It's just a determined system that's part of our nature and the cosmos. So the three states that are antithetical to leadership is freedom, because in situations where you can make decisions without experiencing direction from outside, we cannot say that leadership as we understand it takes place. So that's definitely interesting, and I sure can think of a couple of ethical dilemmas that would present. The second one is conflict, right? Conflict is it's really characterized by the fact that you cannot direct the actions of your opponents, people who are you're in conflict with. And as such, a leader's task inherently in conflicts is to end the conflicts by creating acceptance of the leadership relationship. And as I said, the third one would be fully determined systems where things just happen because of, for example, gravity or things that are not being directed but are part of the structure, whether it's natural or artificial. And so I'm going to be referencing diagrams that I posted on the Gravity channel. So if you're not on the Gravity chat, please go there. It's going to make it more easier. It's going to make it easier. Right now, if you can look at
those things, by the way, are not possible to be opened normally. It gives me some kind of warning, Discord itself. So I'm glad you posted them, but there's a bit of an issue with that methodology in the sense that they're not readable and that well in the size there. So that's all I'll point out.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to compile them and send them out to everyone, especially if you shoot me a DM and say, hey, your presentation was okay, but I'd like to delve more deep into this. Unfortunately, because of the time constraint, I'm not going to be able to really go a lot into the depth of these. So a lot of these things, I don't want to say you're going to have to trust me on this or take them for granted, but I invite you to definitely look at the resources and the book that inspired this talk, and I can share it with you. But yeah, so as we can see on the first diagram, like leadership is the direction of movement. It is not chance influence. It is also a hierarchical social relationship in which you can reliably depend on others to follow. And it is not conflict and it is not war, because in conflict and in war, you cannot lead the person you're in conflict with. That's the definition of it. And so we can start to see how leadership is it's intrinsic to conflict management, because you want to lead both parties into a situation that they can both agree and that they can compromise on, right? So leadership is also a successful endowment with social meaning. We're going to go more into depth in this. And it is also powerful in potential because it holds the capability to incur costs on others. This is one of the most interesting things. Might be somewhat obvious when you think about it, but I mean, people who are leaders, maybe they have you on their payroll, maybe they have certain type of capital where if you're against them, they can push you away from the organization. So really what it is it is powerful in the sense that you can incur costs for others. You can, there has to be consequences for people who do not wish to concede to your leadership position, right? And again, I'm not going to go into the whole political correctness of it. Like, obviously, take this with a grain of salt. As I mentioned earlier, like leadership exists independent of ethical implications. It is very relevant to discuss that, but unfortunately, I can't. The time is not enough. So another thing is that as I explained, leadership requires a promising goal. Really, it has to be able to. It has to be able to motivate people and to create a meaningful goal that is visionary, that is achievable, and that will allow others to basically surrender their will to you. If you think about it, like the leader wants their first, they create their own will, and then they want people to follow them towards a certain goal that they declare. So there are three things that go into this framework, where there are leadership actions, there are leadership structures, and then there are leadership results. The leadership actions are, in a sense, constrained by the structure. The less structure that there is, the more that a leader needs to be able to, through their charisma, and we're going to define that, the charisma aspect of it, But without a rigid structure in place, the organization depends more on the leader to actually lead the way. It's very interesting that the leadership structures that we have right now, being that the state, an institution, a company, they were brought on by leadership actions of the past, but they are not a leadership action per se, right? A leadership structure is a legacy of earlier leadership actions. I thought that was incredibly interesting because, at least for me, I'm infatuated with the notion of leaving a legacy behind that transcends and that lasts longer than your 80, 90 years here on Earth. So leadership structures are the legacy of earlier leadership actions. And leadership results are the outcomes of these leadership actions. Unfortunately, sometimes it is hard to assess the leadership success, especially on long-term projects. If you think about a president's 4-year project, or in my country, 6 years. So it's hard to assess, especially if they have like a 10-year vision in place. But the more the long-term projects, the harder it is to assess, right? So interestingly as well, we can also think of culture in terms of leadership, right? Culture is the sum of leadership structures that we follow. They might be social and not professional, but there are certain customs that we have, and the aggregation of it, seen from a psychological sense, is culture, and they are closely tied to leadership and to the leadership actions of people in the past that either were trailblazers, that ended up creating that type of structure that we still follow to this day. We do not think about it in that way. I thought it was incredibly interesting. Also, we start getting into more practical approaches. Leadership is not conceivable without goals, right? There have to be goals, and really the goals that a leader projects, they require of course leadership action, but they require some sort of like exertion of will, and to overcome certain type of adversity that is going to lead from where you are right now through the obstacle and into a state that you want to get at as a leader, or that you want to get your team as a leader. And personally, self-leadership really means committing yourself to goals and pursuing them, right? It's not only people professionally or in your organization, but it's also a matter of self-leadership. If you commit to your goals, if you get the discipline to pursue them and to create a structure, again, a leadership structure that can channel those leadership actions and actually achieve the leadership results that you're envisioning. And so the first thing we're starting to create some sort of like process, right, for a leader. Number one would be the formation of will. You a leader, someone or yourself, you have some vision in your mind of where you want to get at. And talking about it in the professional context, number two would be the identification of followers, right? So maybe Griff started with this idea of TEC, and then from reading a post by Jeff, and then he approached Levy, and then they got Tam in. And so, but the first thing was someone in there, one of the co-founders, had to have a will. And then that person identified the followers, approached them, persuaded them that their vision was achievable and meaningful too, not only achievable, but meaningful. And then comes the leadership action, right? And so where do leaders' goals come from, right? It's really, they arise from disappointment or optimism, and they're always ethical, right? They're ultimately related to the past, and they require the pooling of strengths. Yeah, so another interesting part that I encountered was that it's really about the journey and not the destination, and great tasks turn leaders into heroes. being it maybe getting to the moon, or finding a new route to India that ended up finding a new continent. It started from a great task that someone envisioned, and probably a lot of people told that person that he was crazy, that leader, or that she was crazy. But that person had the vision and the influence to articulate its own will in a persuasive way to actually get enough followers to actually accomplish it in an organized manner, and create a structure where the leadership actions can actually transform into results, right? And so there are really 6 aspects that characterize the magnitude of leadership: the magnitude of the problem, the denial of the need for change, cooperation with difficult followers, scale of dynamics and conflict between followers, difficulties in communication, and traditional or dysfunctional leadership structure. So we can see how it's intricately tied to managing conflict, right? Change management is also a huge, probably one of the most practical or one of the most clear departments or roles where leadership takes place. You have to persuade people that the actual path where you want to take, or the product or the service that you want to launch, is actually good for the company, and it requires a structuring. So people don't want to change. Our minds can do marvelous things, but they function only with the energy of a light bulb, right? So we're lazy. It's not a bad thing. It's how we manage energy. And so sometimes organization needs a leader to actually go through the obstacles to actually calm people's fears. And I don't mean fear like palpitations and like horror movie fear, but fear in terms of uncertainty. You can think of fear in the context that I'm going to be explaining as sort of like a cancellation of entropy, or as a neutralizing of entropy. We want to be led, we want to be directed, we want a clear cut goal, and we want to know how to get there, right? And so now we start thinking, okay, like what are the things that a leader needs, right? Like competence is I think a major aspect in informing hierarchies, right? You have to have certain types of skills to have the sensitivity to position people with special skills in the right position of the organization. And we can see that like pretty explicitly in the animal kingdom, right? How they distribute their roles within a pack of wolves, and within chimpanzees and other types as well. Of course, we have more intricate ways of dealing, but essentially, I'm gonna start talking about charisma now, right? How to generate leadership strength through confidence and trust. And the leadership attribute of charisma, it's somehow understood as mystical, irrational, sometimes even associated with like seduction and delusion even, but really it's neither good or bad. There's no sense in criticizing charisma, right? Really what it is it's not God-given. We can grow and develop it. But what it is a charismatic person has the ability to calm people's fears, right? To bring people to a peace of mind that when they are being led by you, if they agree to be led by you, you will not let them down in terms of maybe meeting the goals, a salary, a certain type of work organization, a structure, perks, etc. Different things that leaders can offer. And what really the basic conditions for leadership success really are a goal, right? We need a goal. We need to know how to confront people that you lead with this goal, and how to deal successfully with the emotions that the goal brings into people. This is perhaps one of the most interesting things in leadership. Goals, they're not rational, or actually they are rational, but they bring out they have emotional consequences in people. I mean, you can only imagine, like, I don't know, like Steve Jobs when he first told people that he wanted, his whole music library and a small machine the size of an iPod. You can imagine like how these people reacted emotionally. Like, this is impossible. You cannot do this. It's a waste of money and resources. You're gonna get us all fired. So it was irrational, albeit maybe probable or hard to accomplish task, but it elicited an emotional reaction. And a leader needs to be able to be savvy rationally, to be able to articulate their goals and to create the structures that lead people to the goal, and emotionally as well. Have that emotional intelligence to lead with people, to manage the people and the consequences, emotional consequences that are going to arise from people. And so the greater the goal, really the more need of the charisma, because they cause intense emotions. And really, you cannot ignore charisma or reject it if you want great leadership to take place. I mean, Griff is a great example of a great leader, charismatic person, extremely competent, really knowledgeable, and he's been able to lead the team to where we are now. Like Juanca, I mentioned it. It's a great example of all the stewards, really. But let's say Gravity. Juanca had the leadership action to create the leadership structure of Gravity and the second Graviton training, right? Gravity in general, in a specific, the second Graviton training. And it's going to leave a legacy that is going to outlast him and his position as the Gravity steward. So that's a clear-cut example of leadership framed within the structure that I've provided. And again, charisma is very related to fear, but fear here is meant more as a basic urge to act, right? The fear of not achieving goals that could be achieved and not realizing the potential that can be realized, not making the most of the most of your life, the most of your opportunities, is the type of fear that I'm talking about, right? So fear really generates the emotional readiness to allow oneself to be led. And now, if you look at number 2, figure 2.1, trust as a source of charisma, we can see how trust is deeply linked with the integrity, that is honesty, adherence to principle humanism, and with the confidence that comes with having competence, fitness, and the hope that something is achievable. So charismatic leaders really need to instill trust, right? And something very interesting is how fear is related to leadership. I think, I mean, given the situation that we're living right now globally, we've seen a lot of fear mongering, and it's interesting to understand that leading is also related to fear. And I cannot stress this enough. Whenever someone is trying to frame a situation in a way that elicits fear in you, ask, where are they trying to lead you to, right? Because the fear is usually accompanied by a solution. And I'm going to go more into that in a little bit, about how the ability to frame a situation as a crisis is also incredibly important, right? And so something else interesting is charisma is relative, really. It's time dependent, it's culture dependent. It really, there's really not a set of personality traits that equate charisma. It really depends on the culture and on the goal. And so, yeah, going more into the okay. So another thing is the if you look at the number 3, the attributes of the 4 different orientations. So we, depending on where we fit on these orientations, depending on if we are relationship oriented or stimulation oriented, balance oriented, or autonomy oriented. I'm going to go more into depth of those. Depending on which type of orientation we are, we respond differently to people leading us, right? And that's very interesting because we have to understand, we have to have this sensitivity with regards to people. We have to, upon talking to them and maybe having an onboarding call or just 31-hour type of getting to know one another, a leadership skill that pays off is actually realizing what type of orientation that person is, so that you know how you can lead them towards a certain goal that you might have. And so really what I'm trying to say is that behavior is influenced by offerings of meaning, and we seek different types of meaning depending on our orientation. On the rational side is meaning that leads, but on the emotional side, like I said, it's the desire to decrease fear in terms of fulfilling one's goals. And so, as I've said, power is the ability to induce negative consequences, and really creating positive emotional experiences requires like initiative on the part of the leader. We don't want a leader who only leads by threats or by type of action. By the way, as I'm talking about this, have in mind, having the back of your mind, how these pertains to DAOs, right? Because this is very hierarchical and vertical in a way. DAOs are more horizontal. So this theory, in a sense, I'm co-creating a way to adapt this into a DAO context with every one of you. So definitely bear that in mind. And so really meaning, power, and initiative, kind of like the trifecta of leadership, they can compensate each other to a certain extent, right? Maybe right now in the economic sphere, a lot of leaders don't have the opportunity to make really big offerings in terms of meaning. I think in the DC we can, because what we're trying to accomplish of building bottom-up economies. But that's not the case if you work like in Wall Street. Like, let's just make money, right? Greed is good type of frame, which neither good or bad, it just is. Pathologically, bring to an excess, sure, it has very negative consequences. But we're all rent seeking in a certain magnitude, right? So if we think about it, right, the meaning offered by a Catholic Church was so vast throughout history in Western Europe that really the Pope didn't need any armies, right? So it could lead people just spiritually. And I don't think we're gonna end up getting to that point, but there are different ways to legitimize leadership, and one of them, like Pharaoh's, was I am God, right? That's like the pharaonic legitimization. With kings, right, the monarchic one is I am God's representative. With the genius one, it's more down to our era. Is I am more brilliant, talented than others, therefore I lead, I can lead. And trust is others trust me, I'm trustworthy, thus I can lead others. So we can see how trust interplays with leadership as well. And yeah, if you look at again, I'm like really trying to go fast through these, but there's a lot of content, right? So again, I invite you to dive deeper into this in your own time later. I can point you to the resources. We can talk about it like on one-on-one. This is extremely interesting to me. I love to talk about it. If you look at number 6 and how the persuasion, assertion, and motivation complement one another as the 3 leadership strategies, we can see how it's mostly emotional, right? Like most of them are emotional. And yeah, so a leader wants to endow goals with meaning. wants to put meaning into goals, which are just visions and conceptions of the future, and they have a reason to do that. It might not be explicitly verbalized, but we can we can get at the fact that there's a reason behind them by the amount of exertion that the leadership is trying to summon, in a way, right? By the team behind it, by how complex the structure is, or intricate, maybe be a better word. And so, yeah, in a more like a corporate context, we can see how profitability, performance, and cooperation is how leadership is break down, right? Yeah, so another thing is having operationally having strategies to assert one's power. It doesn't really have to be. I've always found fascinating how, like in movies and series, especially like House of Cards or Billions, how you have people and when they want to lead another person, they just go out and start telling a story, right? That's a symbolic representation of power. They are trying to get at that person without rationally telling them do this or do that, but they're trying to get at sideways, right, through a story that is going to convey emotionally that you should follow them, the person who's telling the story, or that if you do not follow them, there will be consequences, because as we said, power is the capability to produce unpleasant consequences. A lot of these stories, instead of threatening someone, you can tell a story about someone who didn't do what you told them to do, or who didn't follow your leadership, and something bad ended up happening. It doesn't have to mean that you caused that, but there are different types of leaders, I guess. Like I said, it's a great social phenomenon. And so assertion is an integral part of leadership, right? We can see here on figure number 9, table 3.1, how there's tension, crisis, escalation, and the breakup or a change in the relationship. So 3 essential forces for motivation, right? If we go more into the psychological mechanism of motivation and being motivated, is really the inner compulsions and the needs, right? If you want to motivate someone, you need to know their inner compulsions and their needs. And this is what I was talking about with the 4 orientations that each person has. If they are relationship oriented, if they're stimulation oriented, if they are autonomy oriented, and if they are balance oriented. And really their whole lens of how they look at the world and how they perceive it, how they internalize situations, is going to be colored by that particular type of orientation. So it's very useful to know, at the very least, your orientation, so that you know how you react to situations, because they have pros and cons, different types of orientations depending on the situation that you're engaging in. And so, number 1, the inner compulsions and the needs. Number 2, the rewards and the compensations, right? You have to provide rewards, be it praise, be it TCH, be it DAI, be it dollars. There has to be some reward and some compensation. And number 3, the quality of treading the same path together, right? The cultural build. The fact that we're all in this together, we have created this harmonious community. Everyone respects one another. We encourage one another. We empower one another, and that's part of motivating people, right? Once they get in the community, they contrast our community with their own community, and they say, "What the fuck am I doing working 9 to 5 when people are, working in DAOs all over the world? Everyone's nice to one another." It's sort of like utopic in a way. I'm sure there are issues that need to be focused on, and we're working on them. But I think it's a way forward. We're progressing in terms of a leadership structure from the corporation to the distributed autonomous organization, right? It is a leadership structure. Hashtag thank you, Satoshi. So leaders grow when they learn to adapt themselves to different employees, right? To the orientation of their particular employees. And leadership is always instrumental. If you don't want to be instrumental as a leader, then nothing will improve. So leadership does not take place in vacuum. It happens in real situations, and you interestingly, if everything is moving in the right direction and everyone is going a certain way that as planned, there's no need for leadership, right? And moreover, leadership ambition even generates resistance if there's no problem to solve. People are like, well, why do we need you as a leader? Why do we, which subconsciously what that means is, why would I want to surrender my will and my time to you when there's really no problem that you're attempting to solve, right? And this is this is why crises, framing a situation as a crisis, and we can look at this in figure 4.1, right? Like framing a situation as a crisis, having the situational sensitivity to interpret a situation as a crisis, and declare it as a crisis and say, hey, I'm the one who's going to lead people, through these crises and into a solution. And so the term group totalization means that you have to basically frame a situation in a certain way and totalize the perception of the followers in a way that they will accept your leadership role, right? And I mean, we see that nowadays with with the crises that we're having. Either you're pro the vaccine or pro staying in your home, whatever it is. They are framing the situation as a crisis, and because they frame the situation as a crisis, they have a lot of maneuver, a lot of power that people give them. Really, people surrender their own power to leaders when they can frame a situation as a crisis. And so, interestingly, leaders there's a tactical advantage, if you will, on being unethical and framing as exaggerating a situation as a crisis, because people will surrender their power to you. Of course, I'm against that, but I'm just saying it happens. It happens a lot, especially in politics, right? So again, whenever someone frames a situation as a crisis, either because a country has nuclear weapons, or because the virus came from somewhere, or because XYZ, a leadership direction, leadership vector, if you will, necessitates that you declare a crisis so that other people will surrender their will to you. I thought that was incredibly interesting. And so, in a way, you need to have the situational sensitivity to interpret a situation from the perspective that needs leadership, right? Because without a crisis, really, there's no need for leadership. People are just, walking like it's a ninja video. Everything's cool, everything's Gucci. But it's really when there's a crisis, when the situation needs a leader to resolve that crisis, and so. A stimulus can be provided for the leadership if there are structural elements in place. So what I'm trying to say is to declare a situation a crisis, a leader basically is making two fundamental statements, right? There is pressure to act, and a decision needs to be made. It's incredible how much this applies to mainstream media and how they frame certain situations in a way that is exaggerated. I'm not saying that the current crisis is not grave and that it requires sacrifices. I'm just saying that they are getting an advantage, right, from framing it in a way that induces fear in people and exaggerating, etc. So bear that in mind whenever someone tries to lead you to a certain situation, right? And so we looked at the actual state, how there's a crisis or an obstacle, and the leader wants to get through that to the state. That's figure 11. And figure 12, again, it's the actual situation, but there's pressure, right? There's a need for decision making. And the leadership action is going to stimulate a path towards the goal that is going to solve that situation, and is going to release that tension and that pressure. And even like the hero's journey is really framed from a leadership lens. If you think about it, it's like, okay, a character is in a zone of comfort, but they want something, so they enter an unfamiliar situation and they adapt to it, right? The obstacle is the unfamiliar situation, or maybe being led by a new leader. They adapt to it because they have a new role that they have to perform now. They get what they want in the rewards and the stimulus that they get from the leader. Maybe they pay a heavy price for it because they can't see their family that much. They have to travel to faraway lands, or battle a dragon, or a sorcerer that does death magic. I don't know, but they return to their familiar situation having changed. And all of this really, it's a leadership character arc. I wouldn't say that's too out there to think that. And so there are three problem types with different leadership strategies, right? There are decision-making problems, there are innovation problems, and information problems. But right now, as we are entering the last quarter of the class, I'd like to go into the conflict management of leadership. Let me just look for it in my notes. Yeah. Okay. So, how do we generate leadership strength in conflict situations? Right. As we said, conflict-free groups do not require leadership. Right. So, conflict management is going to require a lot of leadership. Honestly, a lot of leadership. You have to mediate two people. They want to get their own way. You have to have the situational sensitivity to know what's their orientation, right? Are they stimulation oriented? Are they relationship oriented? Like what do they want, or how do they? What is something that you can offer them, both of them, that will meet their demands at least halfway, right? And a compromise can be reached. So. Something, oh man, something interesting is that revolutions. This is like a tangent, or like a something apart, right? Revolutions result from crises, but the changes. Revolutions also create victims, right? They create victims, and really the changes that are triggered by good leadership are simply organic growth. And sorry about that. The organic growth that we need is something that is longer lasting than revolutions, really. And we can think of the Catholic Church missionary efforts as integrating existing structures. They went into indigenous communities, and they tried to frame Christianity in a way that would somehow, seem familiar to people who ate humans or sacrificed humans, in their religious rituals. So the more conflict, going back to conflict situations, the more conflict-ridden a group is, the greater its need for leadership. I mean, think about the Israel-Palestine conflict right now, how much leadership that needs. And throughout hundreds of years, it hasn't been able to resolve because there hasn't been a leadership figure, or the leadership structures created. The leadership actions have been insufficient, even detrimental, I'd say. But that's just how it is. So something else that I found really interesting is that a person's character is revealed in conflict, right? So once you understand how people deal with conflicts, you have understood their character. A friend of mine once told me that he went to this interview, a big shot firm, and the interviewer was basically just staring at him, didn't answer, didn't do any questions. So the interviewer basically presented that person with a crisis, in a way, like what am I supposed to do, right? There's tension, I don't know if I'm supposed to do something. And by seeing how that person reacted to that manufactured conflict, they were able to understand that person's character. They were trying to assess their character, right? So, yeah, like I said, in the context of the 4 basic orientations or fears that we described, autonomy-oriented people enter into conflict if the perception of specialness or status as standing out from the crowd is threatened. That's very interesting. If someone's trying to steal their spotlight, they're gonna have a problem with that, right? Relationship-oriented people on the other side, they enter into a conflict if they feel rejected and unloved, right? They want to feel that affection, that bonding. I'm not talking about augmented curve here, but actual social human bonding. And the stimulation-oriented people, they enter into a conflict. They're forced into a straitjacket of rules, right? They wanna try the 37 flavors of Baskin Robbins, or I don't know how many they have, right? They want to be stimulated by different paths of action. So when you put them into a rigid structure, there's going to be a problem with stimulation-oriented people. The structure-oriented people, on the other side, they're also called balance-oriented, and they're the other way, right? They enter into a conflict if the world appears too unstable, too unpredictable, too uncertain, right? So now we can see how within our organization, four people, like 4 different orientations of people, are going to be co-creating the value that is driving the organization, that the product or the service. And a leader has to have the tact to understand, let's say in our context within a working group, what's the best leadership structure for the people in it, right? Do we want something that's rigid? You can please mute your mic, please. As I was saying, so in every conflict lies the ambivalence between assertion and relationship quality. But really, both cannot be optimized at the same time, right? You can either assert yourself as a leader, or especially if the person, I'm not saying they cannot be mediated and compromised, but if a person does not surrender their will to you, or I'm missing a word here, if they don't recognize your leadership position, then you cannot assert yourself and keep the relationship like healthy, right? You have to assert yourself before, at least if you want to get the goal done, right? It's debatable whether it's worth it to lose a relationship or the assertion, but that's just the way leadership works, right? Again, it brings ethical dilemmas. Power brings ethical dilemmas, and conflicts really unavoidably contain negative emotions, obviously, but really it's about the role. It's not about the person. This was also something really useful for me. If you have a problem with maybe sometimes we have problems with our family, right? If you have a problem with your mom and your dad, it's usually because of their role as a guardian. It's not because who they are as a person. And that's a very important distinction that we fail to make sometimes. I would find that really valuable in a conflict management situation where you say, look, I don't have a problem with you as a person. I actually like you. Maybe you're a little bit of a dick, but I admire that in you because I'm really nice, and sometimes I get taken advantage of. So really, my problem or the issue is with the way you've exercised your role, and how it has, how that has affected me negatively, right? So that's also very useful in terms of conflict management. And really, successful conflict management is an act of leadership. If we go into the figure, 7.1, which is actually number 17, we can see, the different phases of conflict, right? The area of conflict, how there are potentially different interests and emotionally charged opinions, and there are conflicting elements that are latently present but are not openly noticeable at the moment. So there's tension, right? There's tension that needs to be resolved, needs to be brought into the forefront, and needs to be picked at delicately. So emotions are really noticeable when there's tension, and if they escalate and aggression comes into play, then now we have like a more serious problem. And so open arguments need to take place, and the settle the dispute needs to adapt to the fact that now both parties have turned destructive in a way. And so, something else that I found extremely interesting in conflict management, right, is that leaders' obligations are to their goals, not to relieving specific emotional stress in an internal relationship, right? So this might be colored by some sort of like utilitarian worldview, but really, like we're thinking of leadership. Okay, like there are actions that need to be done. There's a path that needs to be taken, and really, a leader's obligations are to their goals, not necessarily to the relationship of the people. Like I'm not saying leaders need to, need to completely forget the personal needs of their employees. I'm just saying that maybe the priority of them completing their goal takes a higher degree of precedence versus, taking care of the leadership of the leader follower relationship. And if we go into just to finish out number 18, right? The forming, storming, norming, performing. It's the 4 phases of group development. These is really very, very similar to the Kinefin framework that Durga presented in a previous session. And so I'm going to have a one-on-one with him later on to see how we can bring these two together. But basically, forming is like the first phase of the group development, right? Where group members meet, they get to know one another, form relationships. Ideally, you get to know people, understand the different orientations of other people so that they know how they want to be treated. It's not always, geared towards manipulation. It's really like, how does this person like to be treated? What is this person looking for in terms of professional and relationships, right? So that's number 1, forming. Number 2, storming, right? The storming phase, the more conflictual part of group dynamics. And there's increased differentiation of relationships. And that's how the areas of conflict suddenly become apparent and sometimes are even activated. And the different roles in understanding arise and predominate among the team members that lead to conflict and a need for regulation. Number 3, norming, is when the group members find their rule book and their roles, and a culture is created and structures are established. And 4, performing, right? The performing phase is when the roles in the team have been clarified, relationships are established, and the process negotiated, and the group can dedicate itself efficiently to common goals. And so Durga will correct me if I'm wrong, but the forming corresponds more or less to the chaotic one, to the chaotic part in the Kinefin framework. The storming phase on the complex one, on the complex part. The norming phase on the complicated phase on the Kinefin framework, and the performing one to the clear phase in the Kinefin framework. Again, these are
I would say if you swap storming and forming, you'd be okay. I think storming is chaos, and forming would be complex. And then.
Oh, my bad. Then forming is complex, the storming is chaotic, the norming is complicated, and the performing is the clear. And again, this is just trying to get some closure or connect these leadership framework that I'm giving you guys to previous ones that we had in the previous trainings. And yeah, so good leadership good leadership communication is active and proactive, not reactive or passive, right? It is directive and goal oriented. And as you can see on figure 19, we can see both ends of the spectrum, right? Passive being the negative one, active being the ideal or the positive one, situational versus directive, egocentric versus sensitive. I definitely, oh man, like honestly, like a lot of these frameworks, when I was studying and preparing the class, I couldn't help but think of Tam, of Livy, of Juanca, of Chuy, of Durgadas, of Griff, of a lot of leaders that we have in the community as stewards, and how they already employ these techniques. Maybe they do them unconsciously, and they've gotten to them by practice, but having a really like an explicit understanding of how leadership affects us, I think is extremely valuable. And yeah, well, honestly, I can keep going, but I'd like to stop talking and open the conversation now for people to just give us some thoughts, maybe some questions, and just talk about what leadership entails to you, and how do you see these reflected in your social and professional spheres. So I'm going to open up now. If anyone wants to ask a question or make some comment.
I want to jump in because I have to jump to another call, but I have to say that this was extraordinary. When I opened up that 63 page notes of yours, I just was floored. And I think that you've covered so much, and so you went into so much detail and everything. I think we should, I don't know how to like bring this more into our working groups and into the our cultural build, but this was really, really exceptional. Manu, thanks for doing this amazing work.
Thanks, Sam. It means a lot coming to you. Thank you. And yeah, I honestly think this has the potential to become like a bi-weekly type of thing where I give like presentation of power on leadership, and people come in and we can educate the community, the Web3 community, on how leadership structures are created and within the DAO space. So thank you, Tom, for that. And yeah, if anyone else has some questions, if Juanca, you want to say something, please feel free to.
Yeah, Manu, no, thank you. I think this and your presentation and the choosing of the words was exceptional. Yeah, I also liked a lot the way you framed the relationship between leadership and conflict management, and how much do we need leadership in a conflict management situation where we are trying to align two conflictive parts into a common goal. So yeah, in that you have to play the role of the leadership, to try to have empathy with them and to know what are their concerns, and also how can you promote trust between the parts. But also, and this is something that I will be talking more in depth next week, is that no decision is perfect. When you are in a leadership position, only if you like impose it, then that's the case when you are not going to have people thinking differently. But when you are in a leadership position and also managing conflict, there are going to be always different alternatives to go, and no alternative is going to be like the last one, or is going to be like the heaven on earth. You are always managing, you are always creating space, and it's normal that if you take a decision, there's other people that is going to be thinking differently, and it's important to respect that, because the leadership we want is not an impositive leadership, and giving that space for creativeness and allowing other voices to be heard goes with the style of leadership that we are promoting, that is a more of a leadership coming from motivation and from agency, and not from any type of imposition. And yeah, I really liked this session a lot, but I also want to open the space for other people that want to talk.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll
Thank
just
you.
say that was
Yeah.
really well done.
Thanks, Ugas. Yeah, Livy?
Yeah, I could share something too. Yeah, first, thank you. This was really great, and I think it came in a moment where I was questioning so much leadership, so it felt really good to listen to what you had to bring today. And some questions that I've been thinking a lot is how to avoid that people's status sways into decisions, and how to build structures that offer the same privileges to everyone. And sometimes I think being in a leadership position can feel like the voice of the leader has more authority or something. But it was interesting listening to you, that I think that authority can be built in a way that it's actually beneficial for the whole, and not that this is something harmful and that needs to be questioned all the time. And sometimes accepting leadership is like what makes us go in a better direction for everyone, and that it's not necessarily a hierarchical position of power, but just a role like any other role, and how it has like an important place on the functioning of a system. But it was really, really great to listen to everything. Thank you for bringing this up. And I resonate with what Tim said, that it would be really cool to have this more integrated in most of our processes.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I see has a lot of potential for softgov, I mean, really like, obviously every working group requires some sort of leadership, but maybe the ones the most relevant would be softgov, would be Omega, because as we said, power creates ethical dilemmas. And yeah, I encourage everyone to again dive deeper into this topic. Shoot me a direct message if you'd like a link to the book, or just a link to the notes. The notes is like 63 pages. The book is like 250, I think. And really, if we want to distribute, as you said, Livy, distribute the influence that leaders have more evenly throughout other members of the community, it's imperative that people understand why, in the first place, they want to be led by a certain person. Like, how is that person, like, what does that person have that I am attracted to being led by that person? Why do I want to follow that person? Like we said, it's because that person has certain goals and is charismatic, in the sense that the fears that we have of not realizing those goals and of missing out on the opportunity that the realization of the goals would have led us to can take us. So the more people understand this ontology of leadership that I've presented, by the way, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I'm going to keep repeating it because I've only scratched the surface of what this means. But the more people understand this, the easier it will be to distribute power evenly across the community, because people will shift between being directed and directing as they see fit. They'll start developing the skills and the competence that they need to rise up to certain positions of authority, because more responsibility is bestowed upon them. It's not just status for status sake, right? With power grade comes great responsibility. The much trite quote from Spider-Man, but it's true, especially in the leadership context. And yeah, honestly, this is extremely interesting to me, and I see it as being so valuable in our community. Because imagine if this is not something that is talked about, or this is not something that is openly understood in a capitalistic or in a capitalist context, in the Web2 space, if you feel. So Web3, post-capitalist systems that we're trying to build, we have to look at this psychologically and subliminally, even like, okay, why are we being led by people who fearmonger? Like, why are we being led by these platforms or by these organizations that exaggerate or that portray things in a certain type of way? Like, I'm always very skeptical or very cautious about someone who frames a crisis in a certain way and they suddenly become the messiah to lead people into the solution of that crisis. It's like, okay, that's fair, but like, is this person obviously has an interest in exaggerating the situation to portray himself as a solution to the situation, and even scapegoating, as we've seen historically, scapegoating different types of people, different nationalities, different even socioeconomic classes. So all of these can be seen through a psychological leadership lens. And it is incredibly useful to just look at our own life and the lives of the people around us, both micro and macro, and see how leadership affects us. So yeah, I'm gonna open it again if someone wants to comment or ask anything. I see Aloysius.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. This has been like one of my favorite sessions so far. It was incredibly validating to hear this. From my vantage, I spent 13 and a half years in the armed forces, and I'd never do it again, but I've never seen anything work more efficiently than when you like manipulate and psychologically like mess with a bunch of people to break down power structures. So like hearing the power stuff was just like, oh, it was awesome. I had this flashback of a power dynamic thing that's like a psychological tool in military training. And it's where you take the person that everybody's mad at or the person that's getting everybody in trouble and you make them the leader. And then what happens is they treat everybody with their power in front of drill sergeants awful. And then when the drill sergeants are not around, everybody gets to exact their revenge. And it's how we socially like deconstruct power dynamics between a group. To like make sure that like the military maintains the power. It was wild. So like hearing it be brought into this space was just super validating because power dynamics affect everything and people are so conditioned by their environments, and so many people are like decolonizing, whether they realize it or not, out of an abusive relationship with capitalism. And there's so much psychology involved in that. And I think that's ultimately what's impacting folks. And the fear of like structures and organization within itself, like being afraid to like make people have any power because they're so afraid of those dynamics. I don't know. Yeah. It was invigorating. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's very interesting. Yeah, definitely. Again, the more we understand this concept, the more we maybe even treat charisma as not these like superpower that only celebrities and politicians have, but something that you can grow yourself by knowing what it entails and how to develop it and how it actually works within the workplace. The better we can be followers, even not only leaders but followers, and understand how a leader's decision affects us, if it's something that we wish to surrender our will to, or if it's something that is counter to our morals or our ideals or our goals. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Aloysius. That's interesting to see that dynamic. That, I mean, definitely the military is is where leadership is perhaps the most trained at, or the most the most where people go there to actually learn the leadership skills and the discipline and actually what it means. I wish they would taught me this in school, because it's, like I said, it's so expansive, it's all encompassing, and it's very useful. But it is what it is. So yeah, anyone else have any thoughts, comments, or questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say that between liberating structures, which is a way of kind of decentralizing away from specific leadership things and sort of spreading that out, there's a bunch of different strategies for that. I think it's really useful to understand the basic ontology of leadership, since it has been so centralized, so that we can figure out strategies for decentralizing it. So it'd be really interesting to see how the work that you've done meshes up with the different strategies for sort of subverting leadership in some way with the liberating structure side of the thing. So maybe we could talk about that too next when we meet.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be open to seeing how we can talk about this, and how we can fuse like the Kinefin and the framework that I mentioned, if they're even not even fusing but complementing one another.
Sure.
Yeah, and Bianca, I know you want to talk. I don't know who muted you. I didn't. Juanca, can you on? Oh, there you go. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's because I have family here today. It's a holiday in Brazil. I'm sorry. But my question is, like, with all those skills that you presented, and as you say, like, we can develop it. My question is, if there is any like personality type that matches with leadership better, or anyone can be like a good leadership, a good leader.
Yeah, I would say that anyone can develop the skills required to be a leader. They're just gonna have to get at it from a different angle, depending on where they are, right? Depending on if they are relationship oriented or balance oriented or stimulation oriented, autonomy oriented. They'll create different structures around it. But really, it is. Why do I say it might seem like a cop-out answer, like, oh yeah, you can, regardless of your orientation, you can be a leader, right? But what I'm trying to say is that when you are a certain relationship, there are other three relationships. I'm sorry, when you're a certain orientation, there are other three orientations that you are not. And you're gonna have to, that 66% of the orientation set of possibilities, or the orientation sample space, if you will, you're gonna have to understand how you can motivate these people to act and persuade them, influence them to come into your leadership role and act in a certain way. So really, I mean, if you had to pick one, maybe the balance oriented, but honestly, I would say any orientation. It really depends on developing your own again, situational sensitivity, even your storytelling. Like I said, crafting stories to convey power symbolically. So you don't have to actually incur costs on other people. You don't have to fire them. You can just tell a story about someone who did the same thing you're trying to do and got fired. So it's just the more nuanced and the more sensitive you are to that person and to their orientation, to their needs even, the better you can mediate the relationship.
I,
Cool. That's very nice. Because like in psychology, we see that like when we are similar to the people that we are trying to lead, it makes it easier, the leadership. And then I
Right.
was wondering if like a kind of personality like ENFG or something like that would have like better, not better skills, but like would develop those skills better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about the Briggs-Meyer personality test, I believe it's called. I don't even, I've heard it's been disproved or something. I'm sure it has value in like self-knowledge, but I wouldn't know how to equate it or bring it into this context. But yeah, I'm happy to talk to you like one-on-one and talk about how this applies to you personally. I'm open to discussing this more personally. And yeah, Juanca, you were gonna say something.
yeah, that there's this open invitation to everyone to the NBC Book Club, and I find that the book club is very complementary to these trainings. So yeah, I invite people to go, and because there are things that sometimes are like easy to understand, but they're like very difficult to practice, and
Yeah.
I feel that one of them is being the leaders of our own life. Like we always see leadership and leaders as externals, but we can also see the different personas that are within ourselves. Which ones do we give them the spotlight? Um, and which is the leader that is moving us from within ourselves? And in that way, yeah, NBC gives us a very interesting point of view that if we see that we are the leaders of ourselves and that no one can make us feel anything but ourselves, then we are also being responsible for our leadership and for our actions, because it's very easy to say, yeah, I did something because my leader told me, or I did something because that is the institutional rule. But that way we avoid taking responsibility for our actions. And I think that through this lens of leadership and through the style of leadership and the structure of leadership that we're trying to foster, um, we are also trying to foster people that not do things just because the rules say so, but because they agree and they have the intrinsic motivation to do something. So yeah, and that's something that we have been talking about in the DAO space, like how to foster that people participate because of their willingness to participate and because of their intrinsic motivation, and not because of external motivations. So yeah, I love this topic, and I think that there's a lot of to discuss. But yeah, this is a great presentation and also focused a lot in the skills that we're trying to build here in the Graviton training.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I would like to keep improving this presentation. I'm glad a lot of people liked it. I'd like to keep improving these and creating some frameworks and even get with acid laser so we can make more diagrams that are like from TC. And something else that's actually very interesting, there is no leadership theory for DAOs, right? So this is extremely exciting for me to create some sort of framework on, okay, well, we have so much freedom in DAOs, and there are people who are going to be contributing to 2, 3, 4 DAOs. Probably just 2 because it's overwhelming to more than maybe 3 if you're like very experienced or very organized, right? But yeah, definitely I invite everyone to take a look at my notes. Even if you want DM me, we can have a one-on-one, and I'd love to give some suggestions and think about how we can. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that in this meeting right now is Tiffany, who just did her thesis on integral leadership. So I would suggest maybe you connect with her.
Oh yeah, awesome.
That's
yeah.
me.
Oh yeah, hi Tiffany. Yeah, definitely.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Definitely. I've sent you a friend request, and yeah, we can get together and see how from your theses and from this presentation that I gave from the resources that I got it, we can work on something to bring into the TC. That'll be cool.
That would be so exciting. And thank you, Durgadex, for introducing or bringing me in.
Yeah, thanks, Durga. All right, well, we're almost at the top of the hour and a half. If anyone else has any other questions, closing thoughts, or anything, Juanca. If not, then I think we can, call it a day 5 minutes early.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Manu. It was really a great presentation, and I am super happy about the way the Graviton training is turning out. Next week, I will be talking about the conflict management structure that we are trying to implement in Gravity. And I feel like all the previous presentations have been really like tidying everything up, so that what I explain in the next session like gets really understand, because it's the way, the process that we have been choosing to follow, and yeah, I think it's very important to understand everything that we have talked about, to be able to practice that process. So thanks everyone, and yeah, have a nice day, and let's continue seeing each other in these next days.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Juanca.
Thank you, Manu. That was great.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you, Wonka. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day.
Very much. Congrats, Mount Manu. Was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.